This is the third time I'm doing this video, but here we go again. I'm not doing an ism video, so I'm not doing a videoism. And that's because I have two different things on my mind today. The first one is stealing souls. And I'm sure by now all of you have thought about what that means, stealing souls. Now I know for me, whenever I hear that, there's two things that pop into my mind. There's the kind of devilish evil thing, and then there's also the anthropological, body of work that dealt with various indigenous peoples basically thinking about photographs that were presented to them, and then having the idea float that photographs steal their souls, or steal the souls of any other object that's represented. There have been a number of studies with various indigenous peoples and various peoples around the world, and not all of them said exactly stealing souls, but what they said was basically there's some sort of evil inherent in representation. Now, my point is to kind of prove that there's not a whole lot that is necessarily untrue about that statement, despite it being having representations, imagery, photographic representations shown to a culture that had never, done photography or any sort of detailed representative sort of artwork before. They may have had cuneiform or hieroglyphs or something along those lines, but never true representation, as say a mirror might be able to do. And even then, I guess based on the study you would be looking at, even mirrors might have been something else. But it's not a slight against any culture or any time period or anything like that. It's just basically saying that notion, which does come from an anthropological body of work, of photographs or representations being kind of evil or something to be not really reckoned with, or something to be taken a little more seriously than it should. Hold on, let me turn my phone off. So, talking about the intrusion of technology, right? Now, so this idea, apart from the anthropological study, actually went back to Plato, and this is in ancient Greece, where he discussed the idea of representations, depending on how you want to say it, artwork being lies or copies of lies. So that comes from his whole idea of world of the forms, and world of the forms being translated to reality, where reality gets imperfect and not a true representation of perfection. We always use simple examples like trees. There's different species of trees that have different foliage and different coloration, different bark. So that cannot be perfection if there's more than one, because one being somehow mixed in there as being perfect. So it starts with Plato's lie, and I'm not saying that Plato was frightened, but I am going to use that word, as dramatic as it is, frightened, to kind of explain why we have this this back and forth relationship with representation. And I'm using representation. I may go back and forth between representation and imagery, but sort of the general concept I'm trying to establish here is representation, or the copying or mimicry, I should say, of reality or real things. So if you look at the Matrix or Existence, you'd see that they're dealing with the same thing. They're dealing with the same idea of that fright of representation. Virtual reality might actually be something we enjoy and that we have some sort of comfort level with, especially now that we're all kind of acclimatized to various technologies, and there's a safety we do feel. I'm not denying that, but the Matrix existence tends to put forth the idea that we may arrive at a point, even if it's just creatively or imaginatively, or when we go to the movies and suspend our disbelief, the idea that there could be representations of what we have around us that could, betray our five senses, betray our identities as human beings. And that is another example of fright. It is in cinema, but it is that idea of fright, of losing touch with reality. So just to go back to the imagery, and with the various cultures and indigenous peoples that have had this fright of imagery, you could see that the closer the representation gets to the object that exists in reality, the more there's this very fine space where we realize something is missing. And it's in that space where we realize something is missing that I would say the fear of losing your soul comes in. The soul has been gutted out from that imagery. It looks like the real thing. You can tell what it is, and I mean, the truer the representation gets, the worse the fear. There's an example of basically AI where you could see an automaton or an autonomous sort of human-like robot, and that robot gives you a little bit of a scare because it acts human-like, but it's not, and it's in that little space, that missing connection between the reality of a human being and then the representation of a human being, that fear, it gets filled with fear. It feels like it could be real, but it's not. And there's a very religious-centric kind of idea about the human being being in the image of God, etc., etc. I don't know how tightly that's connected with religion, but there is that notion that we are made in the image of God. Anything else that we make that starts looking like the image of God is in itself a frightening sort of premise, or a frightening kind of notion to take up, or to occupy your mind with. There's it doesn't always have to be this sort of philosophical fright, or this religiously inspired fright. There's also a lot of legislative issues with representation of artworks and other works, and other like personhoods. There's a legal aspect. We call it copyright law. We call it plagiarism. So these types of things where you're copying something, it just feels on a legislative level as well, and not so much on a philosophical or entertainment value sort of level, creates this idea of basically fallibility, of falsivity and moral infraction. So I mean, it doesn't just work on this artsy sort of level. It works on a very political level, I'd say, even though it is legislative. But so my point being, I was going to talk about selfies, but after doing this 3 times, I don't want to talk about selfies right now. Covered that. Okay. So yeah, I'll just kind of emphasize the last point. There is the idea of reality being compromised. There being issues around what you see and sense with your 5 senses, being sort of fooled and tricked into thinking that something is the way it is, but it really isn't, right? So I think that translates all the way from Plato's cave all the way to basically modern day, and I still feel we have this back and forth with imagery. So I think that's my point. Part of the point too is that it's not just different cultures around the world. Everybody has that feeling of consciousness being fooled, and having to raise your consciousness, and but the fright only really just comes from the notion when Neo got unplugged, blah blah blah. So it doesn't have to be a very real notion. Sometimes it's notions of photo manipulation or video manipulation, etc., etc. These things come back to not always this horrid fright, but this just a very a very bureaucratic understanding of the imperfection, the malleability, and misconstrued sort of representations of what reality is. And as the technology changes, we go with it. So I now have a poem, and I wasn't gonna, it feels kind of silly reading a poem, but I know Richard Dawkins did it. He did a poetry reading last week, 2 weeks ago, but I am not copying Richard Dawkins. In fact, I actually thought about the idea before Richard Dawkins did his thing. So, I'm going to read the poem. I'm not going to tell you what it's about. I'm sure you could kind of guess for those who know me very well. And I'm just going to read it and end the video. Like I said, I'm not doing a nism, but you could probably put a nism to this, or I'll put a nism in the title. So, it's called It. Fingerprints pressed against steel and glass. The smudge doesn't matter. It's reading your skin. It knows you more intimately than your best friend, better than you know yourself. Your mind wrapped in steel and glass. And then more than you think, your flesh is a tool, key to your place in the world, all your identity wrapped in steel and glass. There you have it. Okay, so we'll do this again some other time, but maybe when I get better at reading poetry online, or in person for that matter. But yeah, there you have it. We will talk later, and yeah, I'll think about the title. I'm pretty sure I know what I'm going to do with the title of this video, but I'm probably not gonna tell you. Okay, bye.